Praise be to God. Today's Bible portion is from the first book of Samuel, from chapter 16 till 19. Earlier in chapter 15, we read, God rejected Saul as king due to his disobedience in the matter of the Amalekites. In chapter 16, God spoke to Samuel and told him to go to the house of Jesse, a man from Bethlehem, and there he would find the next king of Israel. Samuel took a sacrifice, went to Bethlehem, and invited Jesse and his sons to accompany him to the sacrifice. Looking over Jesse's sons, Samuel assumed one named Eliab would be God's selection, but God told Samuel his choice would be based on the man's heart, not his outward appearance. Jesse put forward 7 of his sons, but the Lord rejected them all. Jesse had one final son, the youngest, but he was shepherding the sheep. Samuel asked Jesse to summon his youngest son, whose name was David. God informed Samuel that David was his selection to be the next king. Samuel took his horn of oil and anointed David. The Spirit of God came powerfully upon David from that day forward. God's Spirit left Saul, and Lord gave him an evil spirit which tormented him. Saul's servants saw their king's suffering and encouraged him to find a musician to play music when the evil spirit afflicted him. One of the servants recommended a young Bethlehemite who was talented at playing the lyre. Saul sent to Jesse and requested David to be sent to him. Whenever the evil spirit afflicted Saul, David would play the lyre and Saul would get relief. The Philistines brought an army to Sokoh to fight against the Israelites in Saul. Every day, a giant man from the Philistine camp challenged the Israelites to send a man to fight against him. The giant man's name was Goliath, and the text says he stood at a height of 6 cubits and a span. He challenged the Israelites for 40 days in a row, and he mocked them and their God. 3 of David's older brothers were part of Saul's army, but David was at home caring for his father's sheep. One day, David's father sent him to the battlefield to deliver food to his brothers. While at the battlefield, David heard Goliath's challenge. David spoke to King Saul and told him he would kill Goliath. Saul dismissed David because he was a young man, but David insisted, telling Saul how he had killed lions and bears to protect his father's sheep. David said to Saul, "Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God." Saul eventually agreed to let David fight. David went to meet Goliath with a sling and 5 smooth stones. When Goliath saw David, he disdained him, saying, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" David responded, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." As Goliath moved towards David, David charged, loaded a stone into his sling, and launched it at his Philistine enemy. The rock hit Goliath in the forehead, and he fell face down to the ground. David took Goliath's sword and cut off his head. The Philistines' camp scattered, and the Israelites chased them back to their cities of Gath and Ekron. David took Goliath's armor to his tent and Goliath's head to Jerusalem. After the defeat of Goliath, David and Jonathan became friends. Jonathan and David became one in spirit. Saul set David over his men of war, and David won several victories against the Philistines. The women of Israel started singing about how Saul had defeated thousands, but David had defeated tens of thousands. This made Saul very jealous, and he worried David would take the kingdom from him. Twice he tried to kill David with a spear, but David evaded them. He demoted David to be the commander of only 1,000 men, but God blessed David in everything he did. Since Saul couldn't kill David, he devised a plan to have Israel's enemies do it. He offered his daughter Merab to David in marriage in exchange for David fighting the Philistines. He was hoping the Philistines would kill David, but the plan didn't work, and he ended up giving Merab to another man. When Saul found his younger daughter Michal loved David, he offered her to David in exchange for 100 Philistine foreskins. Saul hoped the Philistines would kill David before he collected 100, but David brought 200 foreskins and married his daughter. From that day on, Saul was David's enemy continually. Now Saul commanded all his servants to kill David if they found him. Jonathan, being David's best friend, told him about his father's command and instructed him to hide while he tried to convince his father to change his mind. Jonathan went to Saul and spoke highly about David. He reminded the king of David's loyalty in the past and asked Saul not to sin against a man who had never sinned against him. Saul listened to his son and withdrew his order to kill David. Sometime later, an evil spirit from the Lord afflicted Saul, and he tried to kill David again by throwing a spear at him. David managed to escape and fled back to his house. Saul sent men to David's house to kill him, but Michal, David's wife, helped him escape out of a window. Michal took an image and put it in David's bed, with few goat hair near the top. The image made it appear as if David was sleeping in the bed. When Saul's messengers came to arrest David, she told them he was sick and in bed. Saul's men eventually figured out the image in the bed wasn't actually David, but by that time, David was gone. David fled to Ramah, where Samuel lived with a group of prophets. When Saul discovered David's whereabouts, he sent men to arrest him. When Saul's men reached Ramah, the Spirit of God came on them and they started prophesying. Saul sent another group of men and they started prophesying as well. Saul sent a third group of men and they started prophesying as well. Finally, Saul decided to go to Ramah himself. On his way to Naioth in Ramah, God's Spirit came upon him and he also prophesied. This is why people say, is Saul also among the prophets? Thanks for listening. I hope it was useful. God bless.